The seat that changed everything. He entered the aircraft quietly, unnoticed at first. No fanfare, no demands, just a young man with a boarding pass and a sense of calm. His name was Evan Brooks, and he was 17. Clad in a clean dark hoodie, fresh sneakers, and jeans, Evan had a pair of sleek headphones draped around his neck and a slim black phone resting in his palm. As he walked down the aisle toward first class, passengers barely glanced up from their phones and newspapers. To them, he was just another kid, probably misplaced. But Evan knew exactly where he was going. Seat to A, window view, just like he preferred. He placed his carry-on in the overhead bin, slid into his seat, and pulled out a well-worn novel, its corners softened by time. For a few blissful minutes, he disappeared into the pages. The tranquility shattered when a flight attendant appeared. Her name was Susan Riggs, a woman in her late 40s with a sharp bun and an even sharper gaze. She moved with the brisk authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Her eyes landed on Evan, and her expression shifted. Suspicion clouded her face. She approached, arms crossed, voice clipped loud enough for others to hear. "Excuse me," she said stiffly. "Are you supposed to be sitting here?" Evan looked up, momentarily confused. "Yes, ma'am." "Ticket, please," she demanded, her hand outstretched. Evan pulled the folded slip from his hoodie pocket. She snatched it without a word. Her gaze flickered from the ticket to his face and back again, twice. "This is a first-class ticket," she said, her voice thick with disbelief. "I know," Evan replied, calmly. "Are you traveling with someone?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "No." Susan narrowed her eyes. "So, you're alone? In first class?" Evan didn't reply. He recognized the direction this was heading. "I think there's been a mistake," she said, stepping closer. "This area is reserved for first-class passengers only." "I am a first-class passenger," Evan said, voice steady. Susan's nostrils flared. "Listen, I don't know how you got this ticket, but you need to move. Now." When Evan didn't immediately leap to his feet, Susan reached across, attempting to grab his phone from the armrest. In the process, her hand slapped his hand hard enough to echo through the cabin. Several passengers gasped. A woman nearby covered her mouth. A man pretended to check his watch, his face flushing red with discomfort. But no one spoke. Not one person said a word. Evan sat stunned, not from the sting of her hand, but from the humiliation, the audacity. Slowly, methodically, he gathered his backpack, pulled up his hood, and walked back down the aisle. The eyes of first-class passengers pierced him like arrows. At the very last row, he found an open seat. The economy chair was cramped and worn. The armrest was loose. He didn't care. He sat, exhaled, and texted a single line to the only person who needed to know. "She slapped my hand, kicked me to the back." Then he waited. Miles away, in a penthouse office that overlooked the city, a phone buzzed on a polished mahogany desk. William Brooks, a towering man in his 50s, with steel gray hair and a navy suit tailored like armor, picked up his phone. He read the message once, and the room seemed to grow colder. William didn't shout. He didn't swear. He simply picked up the landline on his desk and pressed a button labeled Direct Line. "Flight 781, he said. "Seat 2A. Immediate intervention." "Understood, Mr. Brooks," replied the voice on the other end without hesitation. William leaned back, his face carved from stone. He wasn't just Evan's father. He was also the majority shareholder of the airline Evan was sitting on. And he was about to make sure the skies weren't so friendly for those who forgot, who really kept them in business. Back on the plane, Susan Riggs congratulated herself with a smug sip of coffee in the galley. Another crisis averted, she thought. She had preserved the decorum of first class, or so she believed. "You sure you did the right thing?" asked Megan, a junior attendant, hesitant. Susan waved her off. "Please, he didn't belong up there. You saw him. Hoodie, sneakers, alone. Probably borrowed the ticket." Megan said nothing. She just looked away, a knot forming in her stomach. Then the intercom crackled. "Susan Riggs, report to the cockpit immediately." The coffee turned to ash in Susan's mouth. She straightened her jacket and walked briskly down the aisle. Passengers watched her go, some curious, others whispering. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ronald Hayes, a veteran pilot with 3 decades in the air, greeted her without a smile. On the monitor mounted beside the co-pilot's seat, a stern face appeared of Lorne, Director of Flight Operations. "Susan," he said without preamble, "what exactly happened with the passenger in seat 2A?" "There was confusion," she stammered. "I corrected it. Did you check his credentials?" "I saw the ticket, but he didn't look." "You assumed," David said coldly. Captain Hayes leaned in. "You removed Evan Brooks, William Brooks' son." Susan's heart thudded against her ribs. "Tu didn't know." "You should have," Captain Hayes said, voice like granite. "And now we have direct orders. This flight isn't moving until you personally apologize. Restore him to his seat and disembark immediately after." In front of everyone, Susan gasped. "Exactly." Her world tilted. Without a word, she turned and walked back down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. Passengers fell silent as she approached the back of the plane. All eyes turned. All cameras readied. Evan sat by the window, serene, waiting. Susan stopped before him, throat dry. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice shaking, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat." Evan lifted his head, gaze sharp and calm. "A misunderstanding," he echoed. Susan nodded quickly. "Yes, You assumed," Evan said, finishing for her. "You assumed I didn't belong." I apologize," she whispered. He rose slowly, backpack over one shoulder. "I'm going back, because it's my seat." The walk up the aisle felt different this time. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about the quiet recognition of a wrong that couldn't be undone with a simple sorry. Evan sat back down into A, pulled out his book, and resumed reading as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. Susan stood awkwardly, murmured a hollow offer of assistance, and retreated toward the galley. Her hands shook as she signed her employee removal form. Her badge, once worn with pride, now felt like a shackle. She didn't even protest when security met her at the door and escorted her off the plane. The door hissed closed behind her, and a new current of energy swept through the cabin. The engines hummed softly as the plane prepared once again for takeoff. Captain Hayes' voice came through the intercom, measured and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be departing shortly." The mood in the cabin had shifted irreversibly. The usual indifference that cloaked business-class travelers was gone. In its place, a thick, reflective quiet lingered. Passengers watched Evan differently now, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something closer to respect, or perhaps guilt. Evan sat unmoved. He placed his headphones back around his neck, resting lightly on his chest, and reopened his novel. His fingers traced the page absently, but his mind wasn't in the book. It was still replaying every second, Susan's voice, the slap, the heavy walk to the back, and now, the silent recalibration happening around him. In the galley, Megan stood rigid, watching Susan's empty space. She had served alongside Susan for a year, enduring her coldness, her whispered assumptions, her gut feelings about passengers. Today had exposed it all. Taylor, another flight attendant, whispered beside her, "Think she'll come back after this?" Megan shook her head slightly. She shouldn't. They both knew that what had been acceptable for too long was no longer tolerable. They both knew they had played parts too through silence. The plane taxied slowly and finally lifted into the night sky. Outside, the city lights blurred into soft rivers of gold and silver. Inside, Evan remained still. He didn't need to move. He had already shifted everything without raising his voice. Meanwhile, high above the corporate offices of the airline, executives scrambled. Damage control teams drafted statements. Public relations directors rehearsed apologies. Human resources prepared investigation protocols. William Brooks' influence wasn't something the airline could afford to dismiss. But the reality was bigger now. The story was no longer private. The footage had leaked online. A 27-second clip showed Susan towering over Evan, her hands slapping his away. The audible gasp of the cabin, and the silence that followed. It wasn't staged. It wasn't edited. It was raw, and it had already gone viral. The world was watching. Back on the plane, Megan moved through the aisle with the drink cart, hands steady now. She reached Evan's row. "Water," she offered softly. He glanced up, nodded. "Thanks." As she handed it to him, she added quietly, "I'm sorry for not saying something earlier." Evan looked at her, eyes calm. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement was where healing began. Across the aisle, a man in a Navy sports coat tapped out a furious email on his tablet. He had been one of the first to look away during the confrontation. Now he was promising himself he wouldn't be again. To Rose's back, a young woman refreshed her Twitter feed. The trending hashtags: First Class Bias, Justice for Evan, Flying Willowdifferent. Each tweet, each share, each comment was another ripple in a wave that had started with a single hand slap and an assumption. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Evan finally allowed himself to relax a little. He wasn't naive. He knew this wasn't the end. There would be headlines. There would be interviews he would probably decline. There would be apologies, statements, trainings mandated by lawyers. But maybe, just maybe, there would also be conversations. Real ones. The kind that didn't end when the seatbelt signs turned off. Taylor approached quietly later, crouching slightly so others wouldn't overhear. "You're not alone," she said simply. Evan nodded, appreciating her words even if he didn't entirely believe them yet. He understood human nature better than most adults gave him credit for. Most people weren't cruel intentionally. They were just comfortable. And change required discomfort. Hours passed. The sky outside faded from black to a soft indigo as dawn approached. Captain Hayes announced their descent. Passengers buckled their belts, adjusted their seats, titted their areas. But no one moved with the casual entitlement that usually came with first-class travel. No one forgot the gravity that Evan's presence now commanded. The wheels touched down with a muted screech. The plane taxied to the gate. As the door opened, the crew moved through the routine motions, but their faces were tighter, more measured. The usual stampede to the exit didn't happen. People waited, glancing toward Evan, uncertain. He didn't rush. He stood, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and began the slow walk toward the front. Every step he took was met with silence in it, out of discomfort now, but out of a kind of reverence. Some passengers nodded at him as he passed. Some whispered, "Thank you," under their breath. Some simply watched, remembering. At the jet bridge, waiting for him, were two airline executives and a security officer. No cameras, just as William Brooks had promised. The lead executive, a woman in a dark navy suit, stepped forward. "Evan," she said gently, "we owe you a sincere apology. And not just you." He gave a small nod. He didn't need her to say more. The apology wasn't for him alone. It was for every quiet injustice that had slipped past unnoticed until now. He exited the jet bridge into a terminal flooded with early morning sunlight. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Because some flights don't just carry people to destinations. Some flights carry the truth into places where it can no longer be ignored. And Evan Brooks, 17 years old, silent, dignified, had carried that truth farther than any plane ever could.